I used to believe love could be measured in quiet sacrifices, the kind no one applauds. A packed lunch instead of a cafe meal. A winter coat worn 2 years too long. Extra shifts when my back begged me to sit. I did it all with one picture in my mind. My son walking across a stage, debt-free, proud, unburdened. When the final statement came, I stared at the number until my eyes watered. $150,000. It felt less like a balance and more like a wall between him and his future. So I climbed it brick by brick. I sold my old jewelry, the pieces with stories attached. I dipped into the savings meant for later. The later that always seemed to move farther away. I learned the language of interest rates and repayment schedules like it was scripture. The day I paid it off, I didn't throw a party. I didn't post anything. I simply made tea, sat at my kitchen table, and listened to the silence that followed years of worry. Then I called him. He answered breathless like he'd been running. "Hey Mom. It's done," I said, trying not to sound like I was holding my breath. "Your loans. Paid off." There was a pause. Not the kind filled with gratitude, more like calculation. "Wow," he finally said. "That's huge." I waited for more. I waited for the words I'd carried for years like a warm stone in my pocket. "Thank you. I love you. You didn't have to." Instead, he cleared his throat. "Listen, I'm kind of busy. Big week. Engagement parties this Saturday, remember? Just don't make it weird." My smile faltered. "Weird? You know," he said lightly like it was nothing. "Just be normal." Normal. After everything, he wanted me to be small enough to fit in his new life. And I didn't realize yet how hard he planned to push me into that corner. Until Saturday night arrived. The engagement party was held in a glass-walled restaurant overlooking the river, the kind of place where everything looked carefully expensive. I paused outside, smoothing my jacket, reminding myself to stand straight. I had nothing to be ashamed of. I had earned my place here long before anyone else in that room knew my son's name. Inside, the atmosphere felt polished and confident. His fiancée's family moved easily among the guests. Tailored suits, calm laughter, conversations about careers, investments, trips planned months ahead. I caught pieces of it all and smiled politely, feeling suddenly louder than I meant to be. Simpler than I wanted. When my son noticed me, his expression changed for just a second. He crossed the room, kissed my cheek, and stepped back quickly. "Mom," he said softly, "just try to keep things light tonight." "I will," I answered, though I wasn't sure what that meant. I tried to blend in. I complimented the decorations, thanked the servers, spoke only when spoken to. Still, every time I said more than a sentence, I felt his eyes on me, tense and warning, as if I might ruin something fragile. During the speeches, his future father-in-law praised ambition, independence, and earning everything yourself. He spoke proudly of my son paying off his student loans on his own. The room applauded. My son smiled. My hands folded tighter in my lap, not because I wanted credit, but because my silence was being turned into a lie. Later, a woman approached me and said warmly, "You must be proud. A son who paid off all that debt by himself." I opened my mouth to answer, but my son was suddenly beside me, his fingers closing around my arm. "Mom," he whispered, smiling for the room, "you're embarrassing me." The word cut deeper than any debt I had ever paid. I nodded, swallowing everything I wanted to say, and watched him walk away, lighter, freer, while I stood there, invisible. I nodded when he said it, the way you nod when arguing would only make things worse. I even smiled because I have learned how to smile when something inside me cracks quietly. His hand loosened from my arm, and he walked away, relief visible in his shoulders, as if he had contained a problem instead of hurting a person. I stayed where I was, holding a glass I hadn't touched. Around me, conversations flowed easily. Honeymoon destinations, wedding planners, just a small getaway, nothing crazy. Someone laughed. I listened, feeling strangely detached, like I was standing outside my own life looking in. My mind drifted back to my kitchen table, the late nights with papers spread out, numbers circled in red. I remembered the fear of making one wrong payment, the months I skipped doctor visits, the quiet promise I made to myself that this sacrifice would mean something, that it would bring us closer. Across the room, my son laughed, loud, confident, effortless. His fiancée leaned into him, radiant and certain. Watching them, I realized he wasn't ashamed of what I had done. He was ashamed of who I was. When the party finally began to thin out, he hugged me quickly. "Thanks for coming," he said, already looking past me. "We'll talk later." Outside, the night air felt sharp and honest. I sat in my car for a long moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, breathing slowly. I didn't cry. I felt calm in a way that surprised me. For the first time, I asked myself a question I had always avoided. When did helping my child start costing me my dignity? At home, my phone buzzed with a banking notification reminder. The honeymoon transfer was scheduled for the morning. I opened the app and stared at the screen, realizing that for once, the next move was entirely mine. I barely slept that night. Not because I was angry, but because my thoughts finally refused to line up quietly. They wandered through years I had edited down to excuses. He's stressed. He didn't mean it. He'll understand later. Each thought felt thinner than the last. Morning light found me at the kitchen table, the same place where I had signed loan papers and whispered encouragement to myself. The coffee went cold while I stared at my phone. The banking app waited patiently, neutral and precise, unlike people. Numbers never pretended. The honeymoon transfer sat there, scheduled and glowing, as if it were already gone. I imagined them opening a message, celebrating flights and hotels, thanking me in advance without really seeing me. I imagined standing quietly at the wedding, careful again, smaller again. My phone rang. His name. "Mom," he said, voice tight. "About last night, you were just saying too much. You know how these things are." "I do," I said. There was a pause. "So the honeymoon money. We're finalizing plans today." I looked around my kitchen, the worn chair, the window that didn't close properly, the stack of unopened mail. I thought of how easily my life had been postponed for his. "I've made a decision," I said calmly. He exhaled, relieved too soon. "Great." I tapped the screen. "Cancel. Reverse. Transfer back to myself." "What decision?" he asked. "I'm taking the money back," I replied. "I won't fund a celebration where I'm treated like an inconvenience." Silence flooded the line. "You can't do that," he finally said. "That money is for us." "No," I said gently. "It was a gift. And gifts aren't owed." I ended the call with my hands steady, heart racing but clear. For the first time in years I chose myself, not out of spite but out of self-respect. The fallout didn't come all at once. It crept in through vibrations and missed calls, through messages that shifted tone with every minute I didn't respond. First confusion, then disbelief, then anger dressed up as urgency. "Mom, this is insane," his text read. "You embarrassed me last night and now you're punishing us?" Punishing. The word sat heavy in my chest. I read it twice, then a third time, trying to understand how boundaries could be mistaken for cruelty. I set the phone down and folded laundry that had been waiting for days, my hands moving on muscle memory while my mind replayed his voice from the party. Sharp, controlled, ashamed. By noon, his fiancée called. Her voice was polite, carefully sweet. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding," she said. "Weddings are stressful. Emotions run high. We really need that money finalized today." I pictured her ring, the restaurant, the river. I pictured myself standing quietly in the corner, learning where I belonged. "There's no misunderstanding," I replied. "I won't pay to be disrespected." Her tone cooled. "I'm sure he didn't mean it that way." "He said exactly what he meant," I said. The line went silent, then disconnected. Later he called again, louder this time. "Do you have any idea how this makes me look?" he demanded. "Everyone knows you were supposed to help. Now I have to explain why you backed out." I leaned against the counter, steadying myself. "You already explained me," I said softly. "Last night." There it was, the truth he didn't want to hear. He wasn't angry about the money. He was angry that I had stopped absorbing the cost quietly. When the call ended, I felt strangely lighter. Hurt, yes, but also awake. For years, I had paid to keep the peace. That day, I learned peace is only real when it doesn't require you to disappear to earn it. By evening, the story had already changed, at least the version being told without me. A mutual friend called, hesitant, apologetic. "He's really upset," she said. "He says you promised the honeymoon money and then pulled it at the last minute. People are confused." Confused? I almost laughed. "I didn't disappear," I said quietly. "I stepped back." She sighed. He's under a lot of pressure. So was I replied, and that seemed to surprise her. After we hung up, I sat alone in the living room, the television dark. My phone lay face down on the table like a test I had already finished. I thought about the years I had rehearsed explanations for his behavior, how quickly I learned to protect his image even when it cost me my own. Love had trained me to translate hurt into patience. A knock came at the door just after dusk. For a brief, foolish moment I thought it might be him, standing there ready to speak like an adult. Instead, it was a delivery notification on my phone. Wedding brochures he had shipped to my address by mistake. Heavy paper. Gold lettering. My name nowhere on them. I flipped through the pages slowly. Venues, menus, upgrades. Every option assumed endless support, endless forgiveness. None of them asked who was paying. That night, I drafted a message I didn't send. It said everything I had swallowed for years. I deleted it and wrote something smaller instead. I love you. I won't be spoken to that way again. When you're ready to talk with respect, I'm here. I pressed send and set the phone down. For the first time, silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like space, room enough to breathe, and maybe finally room enough to be seen. The next morning arrived without apology. Sunlight spilled across the floor, ordinary and persistent, as if nothing in my life had shifted. I made breakfast for one and realized how long it had been since I'd eaten without rushing. Even small routines felt different now, like I had stepped into a house that had always been mine but rarely used. His reply came hours later. Short. Careful. I think you're overreacting. This could have been handled privately. I read it slowly. Overreacting. The familiar word slid into place, neat and dismissive. I thought of how often I had accepted it, how easily it had silenced me. I typed back, then erased it. Typed again. What I wanted to say was too big for a screen. Instead, I wrote, "Respect isn't a private issue." There was no immediate response. In the afternoon, I went through old folders, looking for a utility bill, and found loan documents instead. Statements stamped paid in full. I sat on the floor and stacked them neatly, page by page, feeling something close to grief. Not for the money, but for the belief that sacrifice guaranteed closeness. I remembered him as a child, tracing letters at the kitchen table, proud when he spelled his name correctly. Back then, my presence never embarrassed him. He reached for my hand in public. He wanted to be seen with me. By evening, another message arrived. "We'll talk after the wedding." After. Always after. I placed the papers back in the folder and slid it into a drawer. Some conversations couldn't wait for celebrations to end. Some truths demanded room before vows were spoken. That night, I didn't chase his silence. I let it sit where it belonged. For the first time, I wasn't afraid that holding my ground meant losing him. I was more afraid of losing myself again. Days passed, and with them came a strange quiet. No calls, no apologies, no attempts to explain. Just distance, stretched thin and deliberate. I filled the time with tasks I had postponed for years. Doctor appointments, long walks, a closet I finally allowed myself to sort through without guilt. At the clinic, the nurse glanced at my chart and frowned. "You've been meaning to come in for a while," she said gently. "I know," I answered and realized how normal that had become. Knowing but waiting. On my walk home, I watched couples passing by, planning futures aloud, confident that someone would catch them if they stumbled. I wondered when I had taught my son that I would always be the one falling instead. That afternoon, a message arrived from his fiancée. Longer this time. Polite words layered over irritation. She spoke of family unity, of how things look, of how much stress weddings cause. She never mentioned the party, never mentioned his words. I replied once, "Unity doesn't require silence." She didn't answer. In the evening, I opened my laptop and looked at my finances, not with fear, but with curiosity. Without the loans, without the honeymoon, my future suddenly felt possible in ways I hadn't allowed myself to imagine. A small trip, proper care, rest. I closed the laptop and sat by the window watching the sky darken. I thought of how often I had told myself I could wait, that my turn would come later. Later had arrived, quietly, without permission. I didn't know what would happen next, with the wedding, with my son with us. But I knew this. I would not buy my place in his life again. And for the first time in years, that certainty felt like peace. The invitation arrived a week later, crisp and heavy, as if weight alone could demand obedience. My name was printed neatly on the envelope, formal and distant. No note, no call, just paper assuming presence. I placed it on the table and stared at it longer than I meant to. I had imagined this moment differently, warmth, reconciliation, a quiet acknowledgement of what I had done for him. Instead, it felt like a summons. That evening he finally called. His voice was controlled, careful, as if he were negotiating rather than speaking to his mother. "We need you at the wedding," he said. "People will ask questions if you're not there." "Not we want you." "Not I'm sorry. I haven't decided," I replied. There was a sharp inhale. "This isn't about feelings. It's about family." Family. The word sounded thin now, stretched to cover expectations without care. "I was family at the party," I said. "That didn't seem to matter." Silence followed, heavy and irritated. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said at last. "Just come. Smile. Let's move on." I thought of the smile I had worn for years, the one that hid exhaustion and swallowed pride. I thought of the checks, the transfers, the quiet ways I had kept his world from tipping. "I won't pretend nothing happened," I said. "That would cost too much." He ended the call abruptly. I picked up the invitation again, feeling its sharp edges. For the first time, I understood that being included is not the same as being valued. And as I set it back down unopened, I realized that my answer, whatever it would be, would finally be mine. The days leading up to the wedding moved forward without me, or so it seemed. I learned details the way strangers do, through overheard conversations, forwarded messages, secondhand updates that assumed my agreement without asking for it. A friend mentioned the venue. Another asked what I planned to wear. No one asked how I felt. I took the invitation out again and finally opened it. The ceremony would be short. The reception long. Everything timed perfectly. I noticed how carefully my role had been defined: seat placement, schedule, expectations, without a single line that sounded like welcome. I called my sister that evening. She listened quietly as I explained, then said, "You've always shown up for everyone else. What would it look like to show up for yourself?" The question stayed with me long after we hung up. I stood in front of my closet, holding dresses I had saved for special occasions. Tag still attached. I had postponed joy the way some people postpone vacations, always promising myself I'd earn it later. Later never came. That night, I drafted a message to my son and erased it 3 times. What I wanted wasn't complicated. I didn't need apologies spoken publicly or money returned symbolically. I needed acknowledgement, respect. In the end, I sent one sentence. "I will come if I'm treated like a mother, not a liability." Hours passed. No reply. I placed the phone face down and turned off the light. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like rejection. It felt like honesty, clear, unambiguous. Whether I attended the wedding or not, one thing had already changed. I was no longer waiting for permission to matter. The response came the next morning, short and final. "You're making this about you," he wrote. "This day isn't for that." I read it once, then again, letting the words settle. For years, I had been careful not to take up space in his life, careful not to need too much, careful not to ask for anything that might inconvenience him. And still, existing at all had become a problem. I set the phone down and made tea, the familiar routine steadying my hands. Outside, the neighborhood woke up. Cars starting, children laughing, life continuing without commentary. It struck me how little the world changed when I stopped trying to manage everyone else's feelings. I thought back to the moment at the party, the way his voice dropped, the way his hand tightened on my arm. "You're embarrassing me." The words had followed me into sleep, not because they were cruel but because they were honest. He wasn't asking me to behave better. He was asking me to be smaller. By afternoon, another message arrived. "Just come. Don't say anything. Please." I felt a sadness deeper than anger. Silence had become the price of entry. I typed slowly. "I love you, but I won't attend as someone I'm ashamed to be." I didn't wait for a reply. Instead, I went for a long walk, breathing in the cold air, letting my steps carry me forward without an audience. I realized something simple and devastating. A relationship that survives only when one person disappears isn't a relationship worth saving as it is. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future that didn't revolve around his approval, and it felt unexpectedly light. The wedding day arrived quietly for me. No alarms, no rush, no carefully planned outfit laid across the bed. I woke to rain tapping the window, steady and unapologetic, and felt an unexpected sense of relief. Somewhere across town, schedules were unfolding without my supervision. I spent the morning doing ordinary things, watering the plants, answering a few emails, folding the laundry I used to save for weekends that never came. Around noon, my phone buzzed with photos from someone who didn't know better. White flowers. A wide aisle. My son standing tall, composed, already facing forward. I studied his face in the picture, searching for hesitation. I didn't find it. Another message followed, this time from a number I hadn't saved. "He's really hurt you didn't come," it read. This was important to him. I stared at the words, then typed back a single line. So was I. In the afternoon, I sat down with my finances again, not out of anxiety but intention. I scheduled an appointment I had delayed for years. I booked a small trip. Nothing grand, just somewhere quiet with clean air and no expectations. Felt strange spending money on myself without explaining why. As evening settled, the rain eased. I imagined the reception beginning, speeches rehearsed, laughter rising on cue. I wondered if anyone would notice the empty chair, or if my absence would be smoothed over like an inconvenience. I didn't feel triumph. I felt steady. Choosing not to attend wasn't an act of punishment. It was a boundary drawn with care. And as the night closed in, I understood that boundaries aren't walls. They're doors you stop holding open for people who refuse to see you standing there. The morning after the wedding felt strangely ordinary. No aftermath, no dramatic silence breaking into apologies. Just the same sunlight, the same quiet kitchen, the same chair pulled out where I sat with my coffee and listened to the clock tick. I realized I had spent years expecting emotional earthquakes that never came, only small, steady losses. By noon, messages began to arrive. Some careful, some blunt. He was disappointed. People asked where you were. You could have handled it differently. Each one carried the same suggestion, that my absence was the real offense. I didn't respond. In the afternoon, he finally called. His voice was flat, exhausted. "So that's it?" he asked. "You just didn't show." "I didn't disappear," I said. I stepped back. He sighed, impatient. "You ruined the day." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of years press and then lift. "No," I replied softly. I stopped pretending. There was a pause longer than any before. I waited, not filling it for him. "You could have just been quiet," he said at last. "That's what I've done my whole life," I answered. "And it didn't protect either of us." He didn't have a reply for that. After we hung up, I sat very still. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired in a clean way, like after finishing something hard and necessary. I understood then that growth doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like clarity. That evening, I packed a small bag for my trip. As I zipped it closed, I knew something had shifted permanently. Whatever came next, with him or without, I would no longer pay for love that required my silence. Being away changed the sound of my thoughts. In the small town by the water, mornings arrived without demands. I walked along the shore, letting the wind carry what I had been holding too tightly. Strangers nodded hello. No one asked me to explain myself. One afternoon, I sat in a cafe and watched families pass the window. A mother laughed too loudly. A son rolled his eyes and kept walking beside her anyway. The scene felt simple and precious. I wondered when embarrassment had become stronger than attachment, and how easily love turns conditional when appearances take over. That evening, my phone buzzed. His name. I didn't answer right away. I finished my tea, paid the bill, and stepped outside before calling back. "Mom," he said, quieter than before. "People keep asking questions." "About me?" I asked. "About why you weren't there," he admitted. "And what do you say?" There was a pause. "I don't know." For the first time, he sounded unsure, less certain of the story he had rehearsed. I didn't rush to fill the silence. "I never wanted to hurt you," he added. "I know," I said. "But you did." Another pause. Longer. He didn't argue this time. "I need time," he finally said. So do I replied. After the call ended, I stood watching the sun lower into the water, calm and unbothered by what it left behind. I understood then that distance can be honest work. Not a punishment. Not an escape. Just space where truth can breathe. For years I had paid to keep him close. Now I was learning something harder and cleaner. Closeness that costs your self-respect isn't closeness at all. When I returned home, the house felt different, not emptier, but quieter in a way that didn't demand fixing. I unpacked slowly, folding clothes with care, placing souvenirs on the shelf like markers of a decision kept. The trip hadn't solved anything. It had clarified it. A letter waited on the table, forwarded from my old address. Wedding thank you cards, printed in elegant script. Inside a single line, "Thank you for your support." No signature meant for me alone. No acknowledgement of absence or presence. Just a polished sentence that could belong to anyone. I set it aside. That evening he called again. His voice carried less edge, more fatigue. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the loans. About everything you did." I didn't interrupt. "I told people I handled it myself," he admitted. "It was easier than explaining." "Easier for whom?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was smaller. "For me." I felt a familiar urge to comfort him, to smooth the truth so it wouldn't bruise. I resisted it. "I didn't help you so you could hide me," I said. "I helped because I loved you." "I know," he said quickly. "I just didn't know how to fit that into the life I'm building." There it was, the quiet confession. I let it sit between us. "You don't get to build a life by cutting out the people who carried you," I said gently. "Not without losing something important." The call ended without resolution, but not in anger. And for the first time I understood that repair, if it came, would require honesty from both of us. Not money, not silence, not sacrifice. The days after that conversation felt suspended, like the pause between breaths. No calls. No messages. I resisted the old impulse to reach out first, to fix what wasn't yet broken, or maybe had been broken for a long time. Instead, I focused on the small repairs within my own walls. A loose hinge, a cracked frame, a list of things I'd ignored while tending to everyone else. One afternoon, an email arrived from him. Longer than the others. Unpolished. "I've been telling the wrong story," he wrote. "I told it so often I started believing it. I'm not proud of that." I read the lines slowly, feeling neither triumph nor relief, only caution. "I don't know how to make this right," he continued. "But I know pretending you didn't matter made me someone I don't want to be." I closed the laptop and sat with the words. Apologies, I had learned, are not the same as change. Still, this one faced the truth instead of circling it. I replied once. Making it right starts with telling the truth. Out loud. Even when it costs you. The rest was up to him. That evening I stood in the doorway of my home, watching the light fade. I thought about all the ways I had paid to keep peace, and how expensive that peace had been. I understood now that love doesn't require erasing yourself to be accepted. Whatever happened next, with him, with his marriage, with us, I knew one thing with certainty. I would never again wire transfer my worth to someone who asked me to disappear. Weeks later, the truth surfaced without my prompting. A relative mentioned it casually, almost in passing. At a family gathering, my son had corrected the story. He had said the loans were never his burden alone. He had said I paid them. He had said it plainly, without decoration or excuse. I didn't hear it from him first. And strangely, that felt right. Accountability, I was learning, doesn't ask for applause. When he finally called, his voice was steadier. "I told them," he said. "All of it. It wasn't comfortable." "I know," I replied. "I'm not asking for anything," he added quickly. "Not money. Not forgiveness on a schedule. I just didn't want to keep lying." We talked for a while. About boundaries, about how love can turn into leverage when gratitude disappears. About how marriage doesn't erase the past but carries it forward. There were pauses. There was honesty. There were still wounds that hadn't closed. When the call ended, I sat quietly, feeling neither victory nor loss. Just balance. I didn't get my money back in apologies or public praise. I didn't need it. What I reclaimed was quieter and more durable. My voice, my place, my right to exist without shrinking. I had paid off his debt, yes. But in the end, I also paid off my own, the belief that love must be proven through sacrifice alone. And if there was one lesson I would carry forward, it was this: generosity without respect is just another kind of silence.